Welcome to Mind Your Mental Health channel. This is our 12th episode. In the past 11 episodes, we were talking about mind, different aspects of the mind. In this episode, 12th episode, we are going to discuss about behavioral psychology. It is also called as behaviorism. If you recall previous episodes where I was talking about how does the mind work. Now, I talked about conscious, pre-conscious, subconscious. I talked about the ego, superego. Then I talked about transactional analysis. All these things were different theories explaining about the mind, how the mind works. If you look at these theories, they were talking about something internal, something very subjective. So if you ask me to show where is superego, I won't be able to do that. It's theoretical and it is subjective. And it helps to interpret, understand the behavior and the mind, but it is all subjective phenomenon, subconsciousness, pre-consciousness. So there were a group of psychologists and psychiatrists and other researchers moving away from the subjectivity to objectivity. They wanted to focus more on observable phenomenon of the mind. If you look at the functions of the mind and how the mind works, everything, most subjective phenomenon is a behavior. I can understand a person is very angry by looking at his behavior, looking at his facial expression, looking the way he speaks, looking the way he is pacing up and down, looking at me and moving towards me. All those things are behavior that makes me understand that he is angry. His emotions are one of anger. So there were researchers who were focusing on behavior. And this research, this concept started somewhere in 1900, early 1900. Probably 1920 and went on till 1950, beyond that also. Even currently also there's a lot of work going on based on behavior. So, to explain about the behavioral psychology or behaviorism, I am going to discuss about 3 experiments which happened from early 1900 onwards. The first experiment is by Ivan Pavlov. He is a physiologist by profession and he is a researcher. His main research was on human physiology. But many of the experiments were conducted on animals. If you look at behavioral psychology, many of the experiments were conducted on animals because there is also evidence to say that the understanding animal behavior helps us to understand the human behavior. Some of the experiments which is done on animal behavior can be replicated in human behavior. That's why most of the experiments in behavioral psychology were done on animals. So he was doing experiment on animals. In one of the experiments, he observed that when a food was presented to the animal, a dog, it starts salivating. He observed that when his assistant brings the food to the dog starts salivating. That is observation. Then he looked at the phenomenon. Why this is happening? So the smell of the food, the sight of the food itself makes the dog to salivate. Salivation is one of the physiological phenomena of the human body or animal body. There is a purpose behind this salivation. Because when you want to eat the food, we need to munch it, chew it and then swallow it. Salivation helps that process. There are other functions also. So the food, very presence of the food or smell of the food, sight of the food induces salivation. So there is a stimulus which is a food, there is a response from the dog mouth. So the stimulus which comes as a food is called unconditioned stimulus. It's naturally occurring. Nobody conditioned that. So it's unconditioned stimulus. The response which dog develops, that is salivation, is unconditioned response. The dog probably born with that kind of a response. So this unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. So Pavlov went beyond this and then continued the experiment. What he did was, he combined the food with another stimulus which is not directly connected to the food. So he used a sound, a bell sound or a noise whenever food was presented to the dog. So sight of food, simultaneously dog will hear a bell noise. So it was done repeatedly, consequently, consistently. And whenever food was presented, bell was rang. So over a period, dog started associating food with the bell. When bell was presented without food, dog started salivating. So unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response was salivation. So the bell was conditioned stimulus, then response a conditioned response. So this experiment kind of proves that human physiology, human responses can be modified by associating one stimulus with another stimulus consistently. Then the association is so strong, when we draw the primary stimulus, the secondary stimulus, that bell, produces a response. This is one set of experiment. Moving on from this experiment, there is another psychologist, a very famous psychologist, J.B. Watson. He conducted another experiment, and he is considered as the father of behavioral psychology. He contributed immensely to the development of behavioral psychology. His experiment is popularly called as Little Albert. Albert is a name he has given to the subject of that experiment. His subject of the experiment was a small boy, 9-month-old child. So this child was involved in this experiment. And Albert was the name given by Watson to the child. Actual child's name is different. So Watson gave a pseudonym, a name Albert. So because he was a little child, it's called Little Albert experiment. So in the experiment, what he did was, he observed the child and presented the child with a rat, white furred rat. So child was playing, so didn't respond to any kind of adverse response or fear or anything. Just the child was very normal, playing or observing the rat. So this went on for some time. So rat is not eliciting any adverse reaction or response from the child. Child probably comfortable with the rat being around. White furred rat. Okay. The next phase of the experiment, what Watson did was, as the rat was presented or left in the room, as the child was seeing the rat, Watson produced a huge startling noise by hitting a 4 feet long steel rod with a hammer. This was done behind the child, behind the head, and loud noise was produced whenever rat was there, whenever child looked at the rat, whenever child moved towards the rat. Okay, and the sound produced a startled reaction in the child. That is a very normal, again, a normal physiological response in a human being. Startled response. It is more common in the children. So the startled response and fear of hearing that obnoxious loud noise. So this was presented simultaneously, the rat and the noise. It was done consistently, repetitively over a period. And then noise was not made, only rat was presented to the child. Very sight of the rat, child became very, very fearsome, started crying. It generalized to that level. Any white object was inducing fear in the child. Any white-furred animal, a rabbit or anything else, produced intense fear in the child. In a way, what Watson did was, he produced a phobic reaction in the child. or produced the phobia in a child for rat and white furred animals, and it went on to white color anything which is fluffy and furry. So he was able to prove that a fear can be a learned response. Fear can be induced in a person. So that's one of the important experiments. At the same time, during that time, it also attracted very adverse comment, because it was thought unethical of involving a child in an experiment, that too producing a fear in the child. This will never be permitted in this current world. Now this happened 1900s. So these two experiments kind of contribute to the development of the concept that the fear or certain responses can be learned. So the basic of behavioral psychology is learning theory. You learn things. So there is a third experiment which is developed or which is done by B.F. Skinner. So he developed the concept operant conditioning. So what he did was he developed a box. It's called Skinner box. He developed a box in which there is a lever, and it's a small tiny lever. When somebody presses that lever, the food is delivered in a small window. So he did most of his experiments on rats. So he left a rat in the box. Rat wandered around, accidentally pressed the lever a couple of times. Then whenever it pressed the lever, realized there was a food. So the behavior of pressing the lever produced food. So over a period, rat learned to press the lever to get the food. See, it was expecting food then. It was pressing and expecting food, because rat associated this particular behavior of pressing a lever, getting a food. So this is the first phase of the experiment. In the next phase of experiment, Skinner developed another lever, and that lever delivered a shock, a painful shock to the rat. They were color coded. There were two colors. Let's say green color lever leads to food, red color lever leads to electric shock. So again, the rat was in the same box with the two lever, and it started moving around, realized that pressing, it accidentally would have pressed the red lever and then received a shock, which is painful, kind of a punishment. So over a period, it started differentiating between the two levers. The rat was selectively avoiding red lever, going on to the green to press and get the food. So this is learned behavior. The concept, the basis of this behavior is depending on the consequence of the behavior. A rat did something, consequence was food, I want to do it more. Rat did something, consequence was the punishment, a shock, I don't want to do that. So humans also do that. We do it by learning consequent to our behavior. All these things contributes to our behavior. So we start learning from our childhood. From the very early childhood, we learn. Behavioral therapy proposes that most of our behavior is a learned behavior. Either we learn it by experiences, we learn it from others, and there is something called modeling. So the parents are the first model for us. So we learn many things from the parent. How the father walks, then probably child also learns to walk the way father walks or the way mother walks. So first few years we learn everything from the parents. We kind of imitate parents. That comes in the imitation of play. The child playing a family play, child playing with a doll. So that will replicate the mother's behavior of looking after child, or father's behavior of looking after child. So modeling is another concept, behavior school, behavioral psychology, where we learn. So all these now, the conditioning, operant conditioning and modeling, all these things contributes to our behavior. So we start learning from our early childhood, learning goes on till we die. Now probably the speed with which we learn might come down as we grow older and older, but it stays. So learning is another very important aspect of human life. When I say learning, I'm not talking about learning from books or getting degrees or professional qualification. I'm talking about learning in everyday life. Think about it, what we have learned. What we have learned in the past 1 month, what made us avoid few things, what made us go after few things. All this contributes to the behavioral psychology. Dear viewers, so today we learned something about behavioral psychology. It's a huge topic. It's a huge topic. Still research is going on. And behavioral psychology is quite helpful in many fields. For example, organizational behavior is another major management strategies, now management topic. And educational behavior, how the children behave, what can be done to modify certain behavior. And behavioral techniques are hugely used in mental health clinics now, treating illnesses. For example, phobia is a classical example where we can treat them with behavioral therapy. The different behavioral techniques is collectively called as behavioral therapy. So there's a number of therapeutic techniques in behavioral psychology which is used to treat patients. And behavioral techniques can also use to self-development. We can analyze our own behavior. We can see what behavior is positive behavior, what we need to do, certain things. Now procrastination is another one behavior. So how to manage that, behavioral, how to manage that. All these things can be managed or supported by behavioral concepts. So in this episode, we learned something about behavior. Next episode, I'm going to talk about brain. In the past 12 episodes, I have been talking about mind, but I couldn't show you mind. I can't show you. It's a subjective phenomenon. It is not objective. Of course, we can look at the behavior, but I can't show you. I have talked about id, ego, superego. If you ask me, show me where is it, I can't show you. It's a theoretical framework. It helps us to understand or interpret the mind. So everything is subjective. Many times, emotions can be subjective unless you express it facially or your behavior or speech. So most of our mental mechanisms are subjective. So when I said subjective, I also told you that the mind predominantly based in the brain. Certain function of the brain is called as a mind. So naturally I need to tell you something about the brain. In the next episode, I'll try to explain to you certain aspects of the brain which relate to the mind. I'll try to do that. It's a big topic. It's a branch by itself. Neuroscience is a very big specialty and branch by itself. But I'll attempt to explain to you about the brain and connect it to the mind. Thank you for viewing. See you again. Bye.